Hello everyone. My name is Kamal Manocha. I represent PMS AIF World. Welcome to all of you for another webinar. Today we have with Mr. Ashish Agarwal, who is from Edelweiss Asset Management. It's a very interesting webinar because we are in interesting times and we have seen last 2 consecutive years where listed equity space has seen massive flows, from all corners, whether it be FIIs or it be domestic investors, and we have seen the massive returns generated by listed equities. But at the same time, there is a action which is taking place in the private equity space, and there are some fine fund managers which are focusing on the unlisted space because there is a lot of opportunity in the unlisted space, and because we represent the world of alternates, it's absolutely pertinent to understand first of all the unlisted space in depth. And hence, we have kept an educative session today with Mr. Ashish Agarwal to deep dive and understand the entire unlisted space in terms of various stages, of fundraising and various stages of investments. At the same time, I'll give a brief introduction to Ashish Agarwal's background, and then Ashish will build upon it. Ashish brings with him 20 years of experience, particularly, in this space. He hails, he comes from a background where he has worked in the financial services domain for more than 15 years in the Silicon Valley. And today he's part of Edelweiss, and he's going to build a platform which is focused on private equity funds. And Edelweiss, as we know, is well known for alternative investment products. And under Ashish's capable leadership, one of the divisions of Edelweiss is going to come up with series of alternate investment funds, which are going to be particularly in the space of private equity funds for growth capital and in the mid stage private equity. So that is the brief background of Ashish, and that is the responsibility that he's going to kind of do. And before that, before he starts, I also want to kind of thank all of you who have given us so overwhelming response for our upcoming event, which is in February. We have seen more than 1,100 registrations already, and I'll talk about more eventually when we kind of go during this session. Over to you, Ashish.
Thanks, Kamal. Thank you for that introduction. Maybe before I just begin, let me make a small clarification and errata in the introduction. So I haven't spent as much time in the Silicon Valley as was alluded to. My experience has been across 2 phases in my career. The first 5 years was in the Silicon Valley as a technocrat. But then for the last 15 years, I've been based in India doing private equity in India with a firm called Navis Capital, which is a buyout fund. So let me go through the next half an hour, sharing with you my views on, one, presenting the landscape of Indian private equity, but also sharing with you my outlook, why I think this is a very exciting space to be for the next decade to come. And also to share with you where I think there are opportunities within the current private equity space. Right. So let me begin with that. For those of you who are not very familiar with private markets, I'll take the first few minutes just explaining a little bit the different terms that you see associated with this asset class. And maybe the best way to do that is in the context of describing the journey of a company through different investor classes. So typically when an entrepreneur starts a company, it's just at the ideation level, or there are a few customers. That's typically when you have angel investors or friends and families come in and support the entrepreneur with initial capital. And the angel investors are largely individuals who essentially make a large portfolio of several small investments, which protects them against the high failure risk that's associated with companies at this stage. Subsequently, as the product gets built and there is enough proof of concept, the company vies for venture capital. And typically, the idea is between 1 to several rounds of VC money, which is to help the company rapidly scale up. This is even more relevant in the Indian context, given many of the companies that are currently raising venture capital are creating categories, and they need to quickly scale up and gain dominant positions in their respective categories before competition has a chance to get in. Growth private equity does something similar, which is essentially providing growth capital to mid-stage companies. And the lines between growth PE and venture capital have blurred in the Indian context over the last 4 or 5 years. Essentially, private equity traditionally was considered as asset managers who would only invest in profitable cash flow generating companies. That has changed, and now you hear of several private equity firms backing companies that are still pre-profit but scaling up rapidly. Also, in terms of preferences around sectors, traditionally private equity has preferred more old industries, sectors which are mature, where market shares are reasonably well defined. But even that has changed a lot in the recent context of PEs entering somewhat the VC domain in terms of the sectors and the sizes of investments that they've done. Finally, at the later stage, you have 3 avenues that a company typically goes for, which is either buyout PE, IPOs, or trade sales. Let me further make a distinction between growth capital, growth private equity, and buyout. And there are several differences. The essential difference between the two is in the case of buyout PE firms, they take more than 51% stake or a controlling stake in the companies that they invest in. And as a result of that, often they need to offer both growth capital as well as a secondary to the entrepreneurs from whom they are buying the controlling stake. And as a natural byproduct of being the controlling investors, they tend to be a lot more active with their investments as compared to growth PE firms. And this activity can come in various forms. They typically get very involved in bolt-on acquisitions. They get very involved in helping with senior hiring. And also they get involved at a strategic level, just defining the growth chart for the companies along with the management teams that they have backed. So now let's get into a little bit of the evolution of private equity in India. And the chart you see in front of you, it's the green columns represents the amount of transactions that PE and VCs have done in India in that specific year. And as you can see, the amount of activity in private markets has grown at a very rapid clip, particularly in the last 5 years, where the industry has gone from 100,000 crores to over 400,000 crores. It's a 4x growth in the last 5 years in terms of amount of money that's been deployed. The other interesting observation from this data is the average deal sizes have also expanded. They used to be closer to 150 crores and in recent times are in excess of 300 crores. I'll also take you through the evolution of private equity in terms of the 4 different stages, as I define them, that this industry has gone through over the last 20 years. To begin with, in the 2000 to 2005 period, this was really the initial days of private equity in India. There were very few transactions, very few number of players. ICICI Venture and India Value Fund, which was renamed as True North, were among the early players. Chris Capital, set up by Ashish Dhawan, has been one of the most successful domestic entrepreneurship stories in the Indian private equity space, was also set up during this time. Most foreign funds were during this time operating largely from overseas, and they didn't have their local offices by then. Moving on to the next phase, which is the 2005 to 2009 timeframe. This is where particularly buyout private equity funds started setting up local offices. As you'd expect, with the need to be a lot more actively engaged with their investees, they needed to have local teams and local presence to make meaningful investments. Most of the investment activity, though, during this time was still largely growth-related investments, and the buyouts was still a fairly new concept in India during this time period. Towards the end of this time period, you had the growth of domestic new entrants. Multiples, Kedara, Everstone, and a few other firms were set up around this time frame, and they really created their portfolio for their first fund in the subsequent 5 years. I call the next phase maturity because there were several reasons for that. One is that the pre-2007 vintage of private equity investments had quite a mixed set of outcomes. Several of them were impacted with the GFC that happened in 2008. The Indian rupee depreciated versus the dollar substantially between this period of time. And so most of these were dollar investments made into India, and a large part of the investment return got eroded because of just the FX component. A third element was a mixed performance in terms of due diligence outcomes in investments that were made prior to the 2008-2009 period. And there were several instances where there were corporate governance mishaps in the set of investments. And what that did was essentially it matured the industry towards higher diligence standards, and it further heightened the need to really be very local in making the kind of detailed diligence required for investments in the unlisted space. Moving on to the period post-2015, I call this the explosion phase in the industry. As of today, there are more than 800 plus registered investors in the private market. This is PEs, VCs, and family offices. Particularly family offices have been a very interesting and highly participative in the last few years in the private markets. This represents both old money, large Indian corporates and families, as well as new money, which is essentially a breed of startup entrepreneurs who've had success and therefore have decided to rechannel their personal wealth into making other investments in private markets and mentoring the next generation of startups after them. So I'll move on to describing a little bit the reasons why I think the last 5 years has been so successful for this industry. And I think there are primarily two. One is clearly the acceleration of digital economy in India with the proliferation of both more bandwidth and cheaper bandwidth and in both urban, semi-urban and rural areas. And the other is increased liquidity. And that's in itself presents a bit of a virtuous cycle that the industry has taken advantage of. Essentially, as more successful outcomes have been realized from investments, it's done two things. One, people who have benefited from those successful outcomes have put their monies back into private markets. And the second is once you had a history of successful outcomes, it's also attracted more investors and more competition in the PE and VC space. So the impact of all of this change in the last 5 years in terms of how deals have done is something worth going through. Typically pre-2018, you had much smaller deal sizes. The deals were largely bilateral, which means you had one investor and one entrepreneur negotiating a deal bilaterally. The timelines tended to be a little longer. And you had the growth PEs in India focused on 20 to 50 million transaction size. Now, a lot of this has changed since 2018. You now systematically have larger deals, and most deals have now become co-investment rounds where you have several investors coming in. In many instances, you have transactions where several investors are exiting in a round and several new set of investors are replacing them. Timelines have gotten crunched as a result of, I think, two factors. One is clearly companies have become better organized to support diligence efforts. And two, there is certainly a level of increased competitive intensity in this space, which is somewhat forced investors to make their decisions in a shorter duration. The other interesting aspect is an evolution in the focus of growth private equity players in India. Earlier, they were focused on the 20 to 50, but with successful outcomes, they've been able to raise larger pools of capital, and therefore their transaction sizes have now moved northwards of 50 million. The relevant question that many would have is, given the growth in the last 5 odd years, is this expected to continue? Is this cyclical or structural? And my contention and my answer to that is I expect it to be structural growth in this space, albeit with some volatility along the way. And the reason I say that is twofold. One is that there are genuinely a very attractive set of companies that are being created in the digital economy in India that I think are sustainable and will continue to be relevant in years to come. And that pipeline is only growing. And the second reason is, as I mentioned on the previous page, is the virtuous cycle of increased liquidity. And my contention is that the liquidity towards the Indian private equity market will continue to increase. Now, why do I say that? And let me present some very interesting data to you, which will make that case. What you see in front of you is from a McKinsey publication, where what they essentially did was surveyed a group of 80 of the world's largest institutional investors and tracked how their portfolios have trended over the last 12 odd years. And there are 2 strong observations that emerge from this data set, particularly with respect to private equity. One is that it is still a very small portion of the overall pie. And the second is that the allocation towards private equity has unidirectionally increased over the last 10, 12 years. And the reason for that is at a global private equity level, it was earlier seen to be a lot more exotic or off-stream kind of investments. With performance, it has become a lot more mainstream in the eyes of large institutional investors. And I think that trend is expected to continue. The second aspect is how private equity investments across the globe break down in terms of geographical allocations. And the main point here is that Asia still represents a very small part of the global allocation towards private equity. So at one end, you have private equity as an asset class itself getting more dollars. And two, Asia is still a small part, but is increasing in terms of attracting private equity capital. In this context, when you look at India and how it relates to other large and relevant private equity markets, there are several observations with this data set. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see essentially an evolution of PE and VC deal volume in these markets, particularly over the last 6 years. And the India attribution is shaded in gray. As you can see, it's really grown from being a very irrelevant portion of the global pie to now being slightly more relevant because of the kind of growth rate it's had. This is notwithstanding the comment I made on the previous 2 pages, which is, despite all of this, India is still only a few bips of global asset allocation. On the right-hand side of the page, you see a chart that essentially shows indexed growth rates of these markets. And as you can see, India is among the fastest growth markets within this data set. So the next question that comes with as an outcome of this discussion is, given the 800 plus funds operating in this space, despite the growth rate that's expected, what's really the opportunity for a new fund? And I've broken up the different stages of investments and profiled them across 2 curves, both the growth curve and the risk curve. As is expected, the early stage of investments has the highest growth profile, but it also has the highest risk profile. And that meaningfully changes as a company matures into getting over a 100 crore kind of average run rate, by which time the product market fit is relatively proven, the unit economics becomes reasonably understood in steady state, and the company's failure risk essentially reduces substantially. Despite that, these companies, while they're fairly large enough that the failure risk is low, they're still small enough that the growth rate ahead of them is potentially very high. And I'll also show you some data to support this. Unlike the early stage, which is very crowded with large VCs and family offices, as well as the late stage, which is very competitive with global PEs and also domestic PEs, which are now investing, as I mentioned earlier, over $50 million checks. The mid stage, in a relative sense, is still less crowded. I'll emphasize that this is a comment only in a relative sense. I think in an absolute sense, India private equity is now a crowded market. But within this space of 10 to $20 million kind of transactions, this is the space where I think there is a great opportunity for a new fund to come. Now, let me describe a little bit more the points I made on the previous page around both how the investments in early stage and mid stage look like across various metrics. As you can see on the page in front of you, the kind of revenue growth that successful investments in the early stage have realized have been phenomenal. But these are, of course, only a sample of transactions that some of these leading firms have made. There are a larger set of transactions that haven't seen the light of day, and companies in this stage of investments have a high failure risk. Relative to this, if you look at investments in the mid stage, you find that the growth rates are certainly lower. But when we looked at all investments that have been made in the $10 to $15 million range in the 17 to 19 vintage, these set of companies have delivered over a 25% median revenue growth, which points to the more robustness of these companies once they've crossed the 90-100 crore kind of ARR profile. A word on valuation, which is most pertinent in the current time frame. We looked at companies in the new economy sectors which have got listed in this year, and then went back to look at what were the valuation multiples when they were in the mid stage of what I call as the $10 to $20 million kind of transactions. That journey has been between 4 times ARR, or the average revenue rate, to 10x plus at the time of public listing. Now, of course, this data point and observation benefits from the point of time that we have observed both the starting and the ending tenures of this range. In the 2016, 17, 18 timeframe, overall market multiples and also public market multiples were a lot lesser than they are today. But the point still remains that as a company scales up and goes from mid stage to late stage with larger scale and a more dominant market position, it's able to get a much higher multiple than what you transact for it when it is in the mid stage. And let me also complement this with the case of with the case study of Nykaa. Now, when you see Nykaa, the initial rounds of venture capital that it raised, it essentially was in the range of $17 million for the Series A, 67 for B, and so on and so forth from there. But what is really noticeable from this example is that as revenues increased by 4x when it went from mid-stage to its IPO, the valuation disproportionately increased by a factor of 22x from the round it did as a Series E round in 2018 versus its IPO. And that's really the case I'm making for why I think mid-stage investment in private equity in India is very compelling. So let me pause with that, and I'll take your questions.
Right. Thank you, Ashish, for such meaningful presentation. I think the data points highlighted were very compelling. The foremost question that comes to my mind is that today equity markets are buoyant, and we see, there is a massive opportunity in listed space itself. And I can tell you that I had just run a poll, while you were giving a presentation to understand from the audience what is the expectation that audience has from a private equity fund in terms of targeted returns versus a listed fund. And I can tell you, as per the results, around 55% people feel that if equity markets give 20% CAGR, the private equity fund should give minimum 30% CAGR. So minimum, incremental return of 10% per annum. However, in terms of the, I would say, from the perspective of investor, how many investors have actually got 20% CAGR in equities? What we know, through mutual funds data, through PMS data. But how many investors have actually got 30% or more as a CAGR return in private equity space, or on how much quantum of assets? What is the success? Is there any real data around that, or you can throw some light on this particular aspect?
Sure. So Kamal, first of all, I'll respond by saying that the way one should look at returns, whether it's in private equity and or even public equity, is over larger periods of time. Now you must remember that most of these private equity firms that I mentioned during my presentation are all 10-year close-ended products. So therefore, the returns that they have generated are measured on how they have done over a 10-year period of time. Now, expectation of public market returns in excess of 20%, I think, is also benchmarked against how buoyant recent public markets have been. But if you were to broaden the scale to a longer time horizon, I think it's only the top decile public market funds that have given a high teen to 20% return over a longer period of time. So one, we should benchmark related to that. Now, coming to the specific question around what private equity returns have been, global private equity returns in EM markets have tended to be, the top decile returns have tended to be in excess of what global public market returns have trended. And if you recall the page I made about how global asset allocations have moved, this is part of the reason why that has happened. But that difference is clearly not 1,000 bips. It's not a 10% additional return. It is likely more in the range of 200 to 400 bips is my sense. But I don't have specific data at hand that I can point you to.
Sure. Second question that comes to my mind is, with regards to the case study that you had shared with regard, on Nykaa. So all of us know that some of these IPOs which have recently got listed, like you also pointed out that valuations have gone up by 22 times versus revenue going up by 4 times. So these valuations going up, massively, disproportionately is also the function of they getting listed and the buoyancy in the equity markets, right? And which means that partly the gains that come from private equity investments are going to come from the listed markets. And is there a data to showcase that how much percentage or how much quantum of gains, from a private equity fund are dependent on a buoyant equity market?
Okay, so I think we should look at this in two ways, right? One is there are a category of private equity funds, particularly more so in the last few years, that are predicated their entire investment thesis and exit thesis. In fact, the mandate with which they raise money is around trying to find companies that are going to go for an IPO in the next 2 or 3 years, right? For that set of private equity firms, absolutely their returns are predicated on how buoyant public markets are, particularly how buoyant IPOs are. There is a separate set of PE firms that do not do that. They simply go after high quality unlisted companies with a view of scaling them up over the next 4 or 5 years during their investment tenure. And then their returns could be either via an IPO, it could also be via other avenues like secondaries in the nature of growth capital, or even trade sales in the nature of buyout private equities. They are less, their outcomes are less dependent on the buoyancy of public markets. Of course, during years of adverse public markets, multiples tend to contract, but they don't have a scenario of either an exit possibility itself getting completely thwarted because of the illiquidity of IPO markets. So that would be my characterization of it.
Sure. So you mean to say that some of these pre-IPO funds or late-stage equity funds, for them, the buoyant equity markets environment around that is, conducive environment around that kind of adds a lot of weight and attribution to their performance. However, a growth private equity fund or a mid-stage private equity fund will yield most of its performance attribution from the private equity-oriented investment and not on the listed markets.
Yeah, so I'll make a distinction on that last part. I'm not necessarily saying that a growth PE will not have a large percentage of its gains from listing gains. It may happen. I'm speaking more on the risk than the outcome. That a growth PE fund would have a lower risk from market volatility than a pre-IPO fund would have. That's the point I'm making.
Sure. So another important question, that investors always ask us is with regards to evaluation of unlisted private companies. You as a fund manager, when you evaluate a private equity company in terms of their due diligence, in terms of certain norms, like we all know that listed companies have a lot of norms to be followed in terms of corporate governance, in terms of announcing their financials, a lot of other aspects around which there have been a lot of forensic ratios, and a lot of aspects have been kind of devised by various asset management companies to kind of rule out some of those companies where some kind of wrong transactions are happening, and hence they can be avoided. But what are such ways or such stipulated norms in the unlisted space that some of the finest fund managers like you, who have kind of devised or who have kind of created some kind of ways to kind of evaluate that at your own level, or if there is a mandate given by any regulatory body around that?
Understood. So Kamal, there isn't a regulatory framework or any norms that have been specified around diligence. Of course, all companies in India, listed or unlisted, have to adhere to whatever disclosures as mandated by company law and ROC. But really, in terms of diligence, the onus, unlike in a listed company where one has the comfort of SEBI as a regulator mandating a certain level of corporate governance and disclosures, in the unlisted space, the onus is entirely on the private equity investor to make a very thorough diligence to ensure corporate governance standards are high in the investment they're making. This stretches from testing accounting, legal, its commercial position, what the company represents as its competitive position versus checking that it really is the case. So a very, very detailed due diligence exercise needs to be conducted by private equity professionals. And this is what the learning in the industry has been over the last 15 years to get better doing that, to ensure that the right investments are made.
Sure. Another question which investors generally ask us, especially after 2021, where we have seen a lot of companies like Zomato, Nykaa, Paytm, getting listed and getting very high valuations, despite the fact that their earnings are negative. We all know that equity market is something which very, very particularly focuses on earnings, and corporate earnings actually drives the long-term prosperity of shareholders' value. However, this is little I would say abnormal or ironical that despite some of these companies like Nykaa, Zomato, Paytm, these are loss-making companies. They have come up with IPO, they have taken public money, and they are having so high valuations. And there are many fund managers which are quite positive on that. So I am not particularly debating on why they are positive around that, because that depends upon their future projections. But my question to you is that how is it that SEBI has allowed some of these loss-making companies to come up with such successful IPOs? What are your thoughts around this, and how should investors kind of look at it?
Okay, so I guess there are two parts to that question. There's one around SEBI and the ability to for a loss-making company to get listed. Now, SEBI itself is not involved in the pricing of an IPO, as you know. The pricing of an IPO, particularly for these loss-making companies, is entirely built using a book building method. So it's a matter of price discovery. So it's the institutional investors who have appetite for these companies at the valuations that the issuers and bankers have proposed to them, which allows these IPOs to go through. What SEBI has put through is a very robust risk framework in terms of disclosures that are required in the red herring prospectus, and those are extremely detailed. Now, I guess the larger question is how many retail investors would go through those documents to really appraise themselves of those risks. So I wouldn't put it on SEBI per se, but more on market frenzy or market euphoria. Why these companies, some with very attractive futures and some probably a little more questionable ones, but both get listed and have attracted investor interest.
Right. So when it comes to investing in the listed space, one of the methods to understand returns is CAGR. But when it comes to investing in the private equity space, because the stream of cash flow is not, regular, and there are irregular payouts coming in between at different times, instead of CAGR, IRR is used or XIRR is used. There is this question which has been asked by somebody over chat. And hence, because of irregularity of the cash flows, one is unable to actually understand comprehensively what is the overall return or a CAGR kind of a return which one is making. And one tends to actually make inferior return versus a long-term investment into a listed equity fund. Do you agree to this, or how would you want to clarify to this particular question?
No, I'll clarify that those two are measuring different things. CAGR is just it's a cumulative annual growth rate, whether of earnings or of revenues, but it's tracking an operating performance of how the company is growing, right? What is the annualized growth rate? An IRR is instead tracking how an investment has performed. So the two of them are measuring different things. You could also check the IRR of a public market investor just simply based on when the person has put the block of money in and when they've taken it out. It's very distinct and different from what the underlying company has grown over that period of time in terms of revenues and earnings. Maybe I have misunderstood the question, but the two of them aren't comparable metrics.
Absolutely right. This is quite understandable. The next question is, with regards to particularly, when now you will be leading the creation of some of the right growth oriented mid-market private equity funds. And currently, as we know, valuations are very high. Investors are kind of, in doubts whether equity markets, even in the listed space in 2022, will actually deliver double digits of returns, after having seen massive returns in last 2 consecutive years. And at the same time, you are coming up with series of funds, or maybe, a particularly a thought around private equity space. So how do you see the private equity market in terms of opportunities at these high valuations from the perspective of investing in them? And what are the kind of risks hence that investors need to take care of while selecting some of these private equity funds, and hence what is the uniqueness that you think that you will be kind of working upon when you will be coming up with your objective of your fund?
Sure. So Kamal, thanks for that question. I think it's a great question to ask, particularly in the context of the current times. Let me answer that in several parts. So one, I absolutely agree of the risk that has been highlighted. A lot of valuations are very high and frothy in the current time. I don't expect this to continue in a linear way as it has in the last few years, particularly in terms of sustainability of these very high valuations. But what one has to essentially look at, and what I'm essentially looking to do, is two things. And one is you have to ensure that the investee company that you put money in is of very high quality. Quality in terms of both the product and service, its distinctiveness, its market position, quality of management. In all of these aspects, it's got to be very high quality. Often, as a proxy of this, several investors today are using the cap table as a measure of quality, which I disagree with. If you look at the companies which have the most frothiest or highest valuations, they tend to be successive rounds of investments with marquee names of investors in the cap table, where essentially it is often perceived that that's a proxy for or near certain success, and therefore one is okay to put money in those companies. And of course, those companies have that stellar brand name for a good reason. But for myself, I think there is a very interesting set of companies which can be invested in at the mid stage when they are at that 100 to 300 crore ARR that I described, which one can still get at reasonable valuation. Now, it's reasonable to the current times. So one has to be very realistic about the fact that if you're investing in for example, in an exciting consumer brand, then in today's time, for a brand that's growing at a very rapid clip, paying a 5 times or even a 6 times ARR is not a very unreasonable ask relative to other companies which are trading or rather being transacted at much higher multiples. So I think that's the main thrust of what I'm looking to do, which is to identify great companies, high quality companies. My mandate is not with a IPO in view. It's simply to say a company which is high quality over the next 3-4 years would scale up. And in my experience, I have seen good quality companies have never had a problem with finding exits, regardless of how markets are. So that's the essential premise that I'm going with.
In general, whenever a private equity fund is structured and the one that you are going to set up, what is the kind of diversification across sectors and companies is something that you're going to kind of keep in mind or offer to investors?
Sure. So I'm looking to construct a portfolio of 12 to 15 companies in the fund that we are looking to launch. And they would be across various sectors. It's a sector agnostic fund. I haven't set specific rules of what sector diversification would be. That would evolve naturally based on opportunities found.
Sure. And with regards to diversification, as in the listed space, we know there are concentrated portfolios to diversified portfolios, and in the unlisted space, through an AIF structure, because the minimum ticket size is 1 crore, spreading 1 crore into 12 companies in the unlisted space, given the global standards, is it a concentrated portfolio or is it a fine diversified portfolio? And how should investor kind of take it? Should they kind of put their money across 3-4 private equity funds to have a broader basket to reduce their kind of risk of going wrong? Because this is the probability oriented game. As you mentioned that there are high risks in the private equity space. How should investors kind of view this particular aspect while constructing their portfolio and allocating their money?
Okay, so actually, let me correct maybe in case I've said something wrong. I did not say private equity is a higher risk asset class, right? What I did say is that if it's private equity that's linked only on how public markets perform and linked to the ability to find an IPO over a certain period of time, I find that risky. I think private equity itself, well-diligenced investment in an unlisted mid-growth company is, on the contrary, a very attractive risk-adjusted proposition. Right. So that's point number one. I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? I focused a lot on this and I've missed the rest of the question.
Right. So you have highlighted a very relevant point. My question was that while investors are trying to identify, a private equity fund, should they focus on diversification aspect of the fund in terms of its, approach and in terms of style of investing? And 12 companies, 10 to 12 companies, as you mentioned, will be your approach that you will follow. Would you call it a diversified approach in this context of private equity fund, or a diversified approach?
No, thanks, Kamal. So I think 12 to 15, which I mentioned, is a reasonably diversified portfolio in the mid-stage growth private equity context, right? If I said I was going to do venture capital, then it should be higher because the failure risk of the companies is much higher at that range. So then you write a larger number of smaller checks as you create a portfolio. But for mid-stage growth PE, 12 to 15 is reasonable diversification. Now, the second question in terms of how an investor should create his portfolio of private equity or venture capital basket, that's really is going to be quite a case-by-case answer of what percentage of a person's assets one is looking to deploy in these markets, and preferences around some people are okay with a higher risk appetite of early stage versus others. I think, for the reasons I mentioned during the presentation, that the growth PE space offers a very good balance of a lower risk profile and still a very meaningful growth profile that is less cyclical than both a pre-IPO kind of strategy and also from a less riskier than a VC kind of construct.
Right. You had also mentioned that the success of a mid-stage, a private equity fund depends upon, how buoyant the equity market is, because at the end of the day, one of the foremost routes to liquidating that investment is going to be IPO. Now, in the adverse case scenario where the company,
if I may just interrupt you there, that's not what I said. In fact, I've been trying to say the exact opposite, right? That it is more pre-IPO funds who have, their mandate is both to invest in companies from a perspective of when they will go IPO and exit via that round. So therefore, they are a lot more, their fortunes are linked a lot more to public markets. If you look at even data from a 2010 to 2016 timeframe, before the recent growth phase, most of growth PE invested during that time or prior to that did not exit via an IPO, right? They exited either via secondaries or in conjunction with promoters went for trade sales. But over a longer period of time, growth private equity returns are not predicated just on how public markets perform, so long as the focus while creating portfolios has been more on company quality selection rather than timing an IPO market cycle. Sorry, please continue your question. I interrupted you.
No, absolutely. So my question, you have already answered my question though. But my question, was that whatever it be, whether it be 30% reliance or maybe 40% reliance, I understand that a pure private equity fund is different from a pre-IPO fund. You're not a late stage equity fund, right? You're talking about a mid-stage equity fund, and hence the dependence on the success of the fund is less on the listed space. But if equity markets are not buoyant and your fund is coming near to the maturity, because this is again a very practical question that investors ask when they try to take a decision of investing into a private equity fund.
Sure.
Right? They always try and compare that today I have an option to invest money into a listed fund, into mid and small cap space, where control remains in my hands and I can liquidate and time that liquidation depending upon my own, I would say, observation and my own thought process in the market. But when it comes to an unlisted private equity fund, the maturity is fixed. Now, when the maturity is coming near, and hence, and during that period, if there is some global financial crisis or there is some kind of an unexpected event like COVID, and hence, one is unable to get opportunities for a lot of IPOs. Like we have seen an era where none of the IPOs were coming, for 2000 and before 2020, right? So if that happens, how does a private equity fund liquidate? And especially when a fund size is large, because generally what happens, large firms like Edelweiss and likewise are not, which raise say a couple of hundreds of crores. They target to raise thousands of crores. Yes. Unlike a boutique private equity fund, right? Now, when a large private equity fund which has raised thousands of crores during buoyant times, given the euphoria, how will ultimately they be able to liquidate those thousands of crores in that period, which is not conducive? Because there is a long 7-year horizon. Investor has been invested in that period, and ultimately, during maturity, if that event hits, so this is the practical question that investors ask.
Yeah, thanks, Kamal. That's a great question, and let me make 2 specific points around that. One is, and it was interesting you mentioned crisis like GFC or COVID. See, a private equity product inherently represents patient capital, right? So it expects its investors and its fund managers to have a slightly longer term view on investing behind companies that will grow over a 5 to 7 year period of time. It is not intended to be a investment vehicle for either investors or managers with a trading mindset or a short-term mindset. I said I found the COVID example interesting because even if you were a public investor with the flexibility of exiting, and if you got worried about COVID and exited in March last year, you would have probably missed the best bull run that the market has offered in recent times. Whereas if you had invested in a closed-ended fund, you would have not got just the dip, but also the much more attractive rise after that, which kind of points to the case around how patient capital works, right? And essentially, if I'm probably repeating this several times, but the power of compounding investing behind a good set of companies is proven to be much better than trying to time the markets. So that's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make is the set of just access to the pool of unlisted companies that private equity firms are able to target are just not available by definition in the public domain. And so the attractiveness of the India opportunity, in my view, in the coming 10 years, is to invest earlier in the company's development cycle than when they come to the IPO stage. And Nykaa was a great example of that. If you were an investor in the mid stage versus at IPO stage, your returns would have been dramatically different. So I think these would be the 2 points I'd make. One around the patient capital. Flexibility to exit may not always be a great thing. Often having patient capital is a virtue in my mind, both for public and private investors. And the second is the access to the right set of companies.
Sure. Is there any data to kind of, prove the point that we are trying to here, clarify for investors that what percentage of private equity deals ultimately, are liquidated through listed space, and what percentage are kind of liquidated without depending upon the outcome of an IPO?
So I don't have a percentage number at hand that I can offer you, but I can certainly give you the following context, which is, in the last, even in the last year in 2021, almost $13 billion of private equity exits in India happened via secondaries, right? Which points to the strength of the secondary market as an alternative to IPO being the sole kind of exit. And if you were to look at the data in percentage terms, prior to the 2017-2018 timeframe, as I said, the bulk of exits of private equities during that timeframe has actually not been via the IPO public markets. Of course, the current window of the markets being so buoyant, it's a very attractive window for private equity and venture capital investors to find an exit for their portfolio in this manner. But I keep pointing to this being a more longer term game, and over longer periods of tenure, I think the dependency to markets, yes, of course, is there from an exit perspective on the IPO, but I think it's also there from the impact it has on multiples. So, in a very buoyant market like now, even a secondary exit will attract a higher multiple than, for example, in the 2011 to 2014 timeframe when there were barely any IPOs happening in India during those years. That's the way I would encourage investors to think about private equity. And again, I'd make a very strong differentiation between private equity that's purely done with a IPO strategy versus not.
Right.
The answers differ dramatically for those two.
Absolutely right. So, is there any particular conducive, economic environment which investors need to be vigilant about, which are right for approaching, private equity investments? Like, we know there are various environments which are conducive for various types of investments, right? So today we know, the environment has following, I would say facts. We are going to see, interest rates rising. We are going to see that, yes, there are high valuations, and if earnings do not support these valuations, maybe the index-oriented rally that we have seen may become narrow eventually, and only those quality businesses which will show earnings will continue to show growth, and some of the easy money making, has kind of that will eventually lag out. Investors have seen all these aspects over years and have learned hard way, and hence now investors, I can tell you, in the HNI and ultra HNI space, because we are particularly talking about this space, are well informed, and they try to kind of not just get carried away with the euphoria. They are absolutely vigilant and aware, and hence in that context, is there a kind of a wisdom or a program or any mechanism that you want to kind of share with investors that they need to be aware of in terms of trying to understand that this is the right time for private equity funds? Or obviously, when you are going to now lead the private equity desk, hence what are the right factors that you see which make you very optimistic about the private equity space in the current context?
Okay, thanks, Kamal. So firstly, I'll say that the risk being highlighted is absolutely spot on, right? This is a time when one needs to be very careful, whether it's public or private. Markets have been very buoyant, and that risk absolutely exists. Now, more specifically on the question around private equity and the kind of conducive environment or not. I think, I'm sorry, Kamal, could you repeat that last part of your question? I missed that last part. It'll be helpful for me to
Sure. So the question, particularly is that what is your perspective on the current environment in terms of private equity investments? What's your I want to see your own thought process, your own confidence.
Yeah,
right?
Sorry,
because
I get that.
Investors shoe, right?
So what I began to say was, look, in my mind, quality trumps momentum over a period of time, right? So if you have seen the performance that's generated in the last 2 years from a purely IPO price discovery kind of strategy, has been very attractive. And I would differentiate a fair amount of that has been momentum as against quality, or certainly quality that's priced correctly. And it's very difficult in the current environment to find some of those opportunities, particularly when they are closer to an IPO, either to find them at a reasonable price, or to be comfortable that this is something you want to invest in the first place. So that's the first kind of guardrail that I would point to, which is I would not, at this point of time in the market, myself be very comfortable with a momentum-driven thinking as against a very fundamental quality-driven thinking. Now I'll share a corollary of that, right, which is quality over a period of time always delivers, in my experience and view. If you look at any of the successful companies, and success not measured by simply the return they've given to investors, but success measured by operating metrics of a company's growth, earnings. The journey of unlisted to listed for good quality companies has been rewarding for investors, regardless of what economic cycle the investment was made in or what environment it was exited in. And the reason is very simple: is if it's a good quality company that's delivering a product or service that's very relevant with strong execution, then you are essentially backing the creation of an enterprise in its infancy stages. That's a great investment, no matter what economic cycle you come in and go out from. That's really going to be my thrust and emphasis, which is, if I am able to find strong quality, then I need to be less worried about the market timing piece. And my thrust, therefore, is entirely driven on assessing the quality piece as against getting the timing correct. Now, the caveat I'll make is sometimes you can get the right quality, particularly in these times, and there are many times you may have to make the painful decision of not investing because the pricing is completely out of whack. And that's something I'm mindful of and obviously very well prepared to do.
Sure. So no, it is well understood, and you have reinforced it, and I really thank you for that. That timing in the market is not that important, but time in the market is important, and it is absolutely true both in the listed space and an unlisted space, and hence quality and time in the market ultimately delivers the best possible returns. Absolutely correct. However, the another reality is that human mind is also wanting to complement time in the market with timing the market. And you yourself can think like an investor, and obviously you would also want best time available, like we saw maybe after COVID. Obviously it was difficult to take a decision of making an investment then, by a lot of investors who kind of start to think a lot about risk when times are uncertain. However, they were opportune times. In that context, the second part to my question was that what is your observation and what is your own understanding of the current timing, with regards to investing for 7-year-old or 7-year horizon into a private equity space. Obviously, India's economy is going through progression, is going through a structural change, and hence I see that there could be a lot of opportunities which you could be highlighting in the private equity space, because that is your area of your forte, and that is what I want you to highlight.
So my direct response to that question is, I think it's a great time, right? And I think it's a great time because I think there are some fantastic companies being built, and there's an opportunity to invest in them early in their cycle, right? So for me, that answer is not linked to how buoyant the markets are or what interest rates are, because if I'm able to if I were to make a proxy to back in the early days of Indian private banking, if you're getting into an HDFC Bank in the early 2000s, it's less relevant what price you got in that or what the economic cycles were, but more relevant that you backed the right asset. And I think that this is why I'm excited about what I'm embarking to do and the current time frame for private equity in India. Now, I'll make a second point, which I think is also linked to your question, which is, yes, it's a great time, but was it a greater time 2 years ago? The answer is possibly yes. Could it be a greater time 2 years hence? The answer to that is also possibly yes. If there is a fall in markets, then valuations will become more favorable. But because of trying to time that, would you not invest in a private equity fund or as a private equity manager in a great company or an opportunity? I think the answer to that would be no, right? And this is what I kind of am repeating a bit more than once, that I think, instead of trying to time either a fund or an investment in public or private, I'm firmly of the belief that there's never a bad day to invest in a great company.
Brilliant. Again, thank you, for clarifying it for the audience. Last question, again, I think investors have been asking on chat based on their experience with other funds in the private equity space. So investors, I think, have a lot of doubt and a lot of discomfort with the charges and with opaque taxation and with the way the returns are presented to the investors, especially the private equity, kind of an investment. So what are your views in this regards? And since now you're going to lead a platform which is going to come up with series of private equity funds, how are you going to enhance investors' experience in this regards? And what are your views in this regards?
So it's quite straightforward, Kamal, in my view. Private equity managers charge a higher management fee than public equity managers, which is in line with the amount of effort it takes to originate a transaction, thoroughly diligence it, actively work with the entrepreneurs to support the growth story, and to find an exit. It is a more resource-intensive approach. It is you need to have larger expenses yourself in terms of the right team and the right managers backing it, and that justifies the higher fees.
And how does taxation ultimately happen? Could you kind of clarify that as well, that aspect as well with regards to your fund, category 2 fund? And thirdly, how does a communication strategy work in terms of making investors aware about what is happening inside the investment? Because it is a long 5-7 years kind of an investment. During that period, how do you think that your platform will kind of communicate with the investors in terms of charges, in terms of investments, in terms of expectations, in terms of valuations, in terms of risks, what periodicity or what method or what mechanism?
So investors will receive quarterly updates on the fund performance, but they will also receive communication about each investment at the time of a new investment being made. So that's on the communication piece. On the tax, as I understand, the tax is a pass-through to the investor. So essentially it works in a similar kind of capital gains form as anything else.
Sure. So I think, I will sum it up for the audience. Ashish, thank you very much for answering to all these questions, and I wish you all the very best. And as a summary, I would say that, we have to be positive and optimistic about any investments. And when we are giving money to a skilled fund manager, and we ought to be kind of believing that, yes, quality investments over a longer period of time do deliver great returns. But at the same time, investor needs to be involved in selecting the right fund manager and, obviously be taking care of one's asset allocation while allocating a particular, part of a portfolio to a particular fund. Each fund comes with different and unique risks and returns. And in that space, a pre-IPO fund or a late stage, equity fund is different from a mid-stage, growth private equity fund. And we were talking about a mid-stage private equity fund because these days there has been a lot of, interest and euphoria around pre-IPO funds. So investors should not confuse a pre-IPO fund with a mid-stage private equity fund. And a mid-stage private equity fund could be relatively lesser on risk if compared to both pre-IPO fund or a late-stage equity fund and a venture capital fund, because in the private equity fund, the deep diving is being done more closer to the business and lesser to the economy and the valuations and the environment. And the outcome of that investment is less dependent on the equity markets and is more dependent on the growth of that business. And hence, if a quality investment is done and a patient investor, gives a long-term horizon, obviously the outcome could be 300 to 500 basis points more than what one can expect into a listed space. And obviously, for all this, extra hard work and extra return, there has to be an extra cost, and that is what sums it up. Thank you, everyone, once again for attending this webinar. We'll again be doing a series of more webinars around it. Once we'll have more information from Ashish, in terms of investment objective, target universe, and the context of the fund when it is launched. Thank you, and all the very best to you, Ashish.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kamal.